If an empire can control what you see, then they can control how you think. If they can rewrite your struggles into crimes, they can justify your destruction. Look closely at this image. The invisible frontline security operations in the vast arid terrain of the Sahel. What you are looking at is the hard, unvarnished reality of the Sahel. A landscape where local forces are risking everything to reclaim their native soil, fighting a brutal asymmetric war against heavily funded insurgents. But if you turn on the Western television right now, you won't see a single frame of this sacrifice. You won't hear about recovered territories, stabilized villages, or quiet return of displaced families. Oh no! According to the mainstream editorial board, the only thing happening in West Africa is chaos, failure, and systematic brutality of indigenous leadership. Have you ever noticed how the global news syndicates magically lose their cameras whenever African armies achieve a massive tactical breakthrough? It is a baffling phenomenon. You can have a highly successful joint operation by the Alliance of the Sahel States that completely neutralizes a dangerous terrorist outpost, and the international headlines will offer you absolutely dead silence. But the absolute second a complex high-stakes counter-insurgency operation takes place, a massive coordinated narrative instantly activates across London, Paris, and New York. Welcome back to Power and Pulse, to our global family of critical thinkers who refuse to let corporate media anchors treat your brains like wet clay. Thank you for your fierce, continuous presence on this channel. If you are joining our truth-seeking community for the very first time, prepare yourself. You have just landed at the ground zero of institutional exposure. We do not engage in polite institutional doublespeak here. And we certainly do not bend the knee to the gatekeepers of neo-colonial public relations. We take the mainstream propaganda machine apart piece by piece, revealing the raw, desperate psychological operations aimed at independent African nations. Right now, an incredibly toxic, highly coordinated piece is circulating across the global digital space. Multiple legacy news agencies have simultaneously dropped a massive sensationalized report claiming that the Malian military launched an unprovoked Reaper drone strike inside the country, targeting a peaceful wedding celebration and taking the lives of over 100 innocent civilians. It is an incredibly emotional, highly distressing story designed to make you instantly recoil in horror. It is engineered to paint the patriotic forces of Bamako as reckless, lawless actors who are actively terrorizing their own population. But as always, when you scratch beneath the glossy surface of these international reports, the entire house of cards falls apart completely. The Malian authorities have stepped forward with a radically different account of the event, one backed by actual tactical intelligence, aerial surveillance, and operational data. Stay with me until the very end of this documentary because we are going to look at the massive gap between the Western narrative and the actual reality on the ground, and examine the highly calculated strategy behind the wedding party trope that the West uses over and over again, and uncover why the absolute survival of our native self-determinations depends entirely on building our own independent mass media infrastructure. But before we expose the inner working of this narrative trap, let me know your immediate thoughts in the comment section. Why do you think the global corporate press is so deeply terrified of reporting an African military victory? Let's unpack the hard data. Now, let's dissect the specific anatomy of this viral report to understand how a psychological operation is actually built. So, the Western news outlets are presenting a very specific, deeply cinematic sequence of events. They want the global public to picture a joyful, innocent community gathering, a traditional wedding filled with laughter, music, and families. Suddenly, out of the clear blue sky, a state-operated combat drone cuts through the air, unleashes an explosive payload, and leaves behind a scene of absolute devastation, including a cluster of destroyed motorcycles. And it is a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It is designed to bypass your logical faculties and trigger an immediate feeling of moral outrage. But let's exercise some basic unapologetic common sense here. Let's ask the foundational journalistic questions that these multi-million-dollar networks conveniently forget to include in their scripts. Who were the primary sources for this report? Who provided the initial ground data? When you follow the breadcrumbs, you discover the entire claim rests on anonymous local activists, unverified social media channels, and reports compiled by foreign-funded non-governmental organizations operating out of European offices. Now, let's look at the official operational reports issued by the Malian military command. They didn't target a civilian celebration. Their long-range aerial surveillance asset had been tracking a specific highly mobile vehicle convoy of armed combatants for days. These individuals weren't carrying wedding gifts. They were heavily armed insurgent operatives moving swiftly across a known conflict corridor on a fleet of high-powered motorcycles, a signature transport method of mercenary groups in the Sahel. The military intelligence confirmed that this tactical column was assembling at a specific staging point, preparing to launch a coordinated high-intensity assault on a nearby vulnerable village to execute a mass takeover, seize local food supplies, and enforce their brutal rule on the inhabitants. The drone strike was a preventative, highly precise under-counter terrorist interception designed to neutralize an active threat before it could spill innocent blood. The sheer lack of creative imagination of the Western press would actually be hilarious if the real-world consequences weren't so deeply tragic. If you have studied the history of global media operations over the last 25 years, you will notice that they use the exact same editorial template every single time they want to legitimize an independent government that refuses to take orders from foreign capitals. Whenever a non-aligned nation begins winning its internal security battle without Western assistance, the mainstream press magically discovers a wedding strike. They use this exact storyline in Afghanistan. They deployed it across the Middle East, and now that the Alliance of Sahel States has kicked out foreign troops, they are exporting the exact same narrative template directly to West Africa. It is a recycled script, dusted off and handed to international news anchors to read with a serious, deeply concerned expression. Let's look at the underlying strategic objective behind this continuous media assault. Why is it so absolutely vital for them to frame the governments of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger as entities that are constantly fighting their own citizens? The answer is beautifully wicked in its simplicity. It lays the moral and administrative groundwork for future international intervention. If they can successfully convince the global public that the indigenous defense forces are existential danger to local populations, they can step into the halls of global governance and demand economic embargoes, asset freezes, or even humanitarian security operations. They want to create a situation where the international community feels justified in violating the domestic jurisdiction of these nations under the pristine guise of civilian protection. Let's talk about the staggering hypocritical double standard that governs global newsrooms. The selective empathy of the international press is truly a sight to behold. When foreign military forces spent a decade conducting flawed operations across the Sahel, frequently causing massive collateral damage, misidentifying targets, and leaving rural communities entirely vulnerable to extremist incursions, these events are casually dismissed as unfortunate tactical errors or necessary friction in the global war on terror. The anchors don't weep on camera for those lives. There are no special investigative series, no breaking news banner, and no sweeping moral condemnation of Western Defense Departments. But the absolute second that the native command structure takes full control of its security destiny, the editorial rules change instantly. This isn't journalism. It's information warfare. They cannot tolerate a reality where an independent African partnership is successfully resolving a security crisis that an entire apparatus of foreign advisors completely failed to fix over 10 years. It completely shatters the myth of paternalistic dependency. It shows the world that the people of the Sahel do not need external guardians to manage their internal stability. The real crime committed by the Malian government in the eyes of the legacy press isn't a drone strike. Their real crime is their complete refusal to bow to external pressure. Their crime is taking full ownership of subsoil wealth, nationalizing strategic industries, and proving that indigenous leadership can protect their own territory through direct, unfiltered regional cooperation. We must realize that the digital space has become the primary theater of modern conflict. The battlefield is no longer just on the arid plains of Gao or the borders of Burkina Faso. It is happening right inside the information ecosystem. When the population depends entirely on external entities to tell their story, they are voluntarily handing over the keys to their global identity. Until the lion learns how to speak, every single story will glorify the hunter. This classic proverb has never been more relevant than it is right now in 2026. For centuries, our historical narratives, our political developments, and our internal struggles have been filtered through the lenses of foreign correspondents who land in our capitals for 48 hours, stay in luxurious hotels, gather quotes from compromised sources, and then jet back to their corporate offices to write sweeping, inaccurate, definitive profiles on our society. They don't understand our cultures, they don't share our daily struggles, and they have absolutely zero investment in our long-term regional stability. The establishment of an independent Pan-African media ecosystem is no longer a luxury or an intellectual pastime. It is a critical requirement for national survival. We need our own high-tech studios, our own satellite networks, our own digital platforms, our own investigative journalists who are willing to embed directly with our defense forces on the front lines to document the reality of the struggle. We must build an information shield that can instantly neutralize the continuous wave of psychological operations designed to divide our people and weaken our collective resolve. The historical transition is fully underway, and no amount of coordinated media distortion can halt its momentum. The masses across the Sahel are fully awake, highly connected, and completely immune to the emotional manipulation of legacy news corporations. We see the strategy clearly, and we recognize the motives, and we are fiercely committed to defending our native truth. If you are ready to stand as digital warriors for the brave nations of the Alliance of Sahel States, if you are completely finished with the biased, hypocritical narratives of the Western press, and if you believe that Africa must have absolute control over its own global story, smash that like button right now. Share this urgent broadcast across every single group chat, digital platform, and community forum to break through corporate news walls And also, don't forget to subscribe to Power and Pulse. We are your permanent digital fortress, dismantling corporate distortion and amplifying the authentic, uncompromised heartbeat of continental self-reliance. Keep your intellect guarded, stay unified, and never let a foreign headline define your truth. This is Power and Pulse, and I am your host, Marie. I will see you all in the next one.